They rode pickup trucks and broken hearts straight into American history. They sang about the land, the road, the whiskey, and the woman who left. Country music was never just a genre. It was a way of life. These are the 15 greatest country bands of all time. Let's begin. 15. The Charlie Daniels Band. Charlie Daniels was never interested in being polished. He was interested in being real. The Charlie Daniels Band arrived in the early 1970s. With a sound that refused to stay inside any single genre, blending country, rock, blues, and southern swagger into something that felt genuinely dangerous and genuinely alive. The Devil Went Down to Georgia arrived in 1979 and became one of the most iconic recordings in American music history. A fiddle duel with the devil that showcased Daniels' extraordinary instrumental ability and his gift for storytelling at its absolute peak. But the band was always more than that one song. They were a live act of extraordinary power, capable of filling arenas and holding audiences completely captive for hours. 14. Alabama. Before Alabama, country music had not fully understood what it could become at a commercial level. After Alabama, everything changed. The group from Fort Payne arrived in the late 1970s after years of playing small clubs across the American South, and when they finally broke through, they did so with a force that reshaped the entire genre. Between 1980 and 1987, they scored 21 consecutive #1 singles, a record that remains one of the most extraordinary commercial achievements in country music history. Their sound was warm and accessible without ever feeling dishonest, blending country tradition with rock energy and pop melody in a way that opened the genre to audiences who had never previously considered themselves country fans. Randy Owens' voice carried the weight of genuine experience, and the band around him was tight, disciplined, and completely committed. 13. The Statler Brothers. The Statler Brothers were the kind of vocal group that made harmony sound like the most natural thing in the world. Formed in Virginia in the early 1960s, they spent decades producing close harmony country music of such consistent quality and such genuine warmth that their influence spread far beyond their chart success. They began their career as part of Johnny Cash's touring band,
She found me outside one Sunday morning.
which told you everything about the level at which they were operating from the very beginning. Flowers on the Wall, their breakthrough hit, reached the top 5 on both country and pop charts in 1965, and announced a group with a gift for melody and a flair for storytelling that would sustain them for 40 years. They won more Country Music Association awards than any other group in history, a record that speaks not to a moment of commercial success, but to a lifetime of genuine excellence. 12. Sawyer Brown. Sawyer Brown arrived through one of the most unusual entry points in country music history, winning the television talent competition Star Search in 1983 and parlaying that visibility into a recording career that lasted for decades and produced some of the most emotionally resonant country music of the late 80s and 90s. They were never the most fashionable band on the circuit, but they were among the most consistent, releasing hit after hit with a reliability that more celebrated acts rarely matched. The Walk, released in 1992, was their commercial and artistic peak, a moving meditation on fatherhood and time that connected with audiences on a level that transcended genre entirely. Mark Miller's vocals carried genuine feeling without ever tipping into sentimentality, and the band behind him understood instinctively how to serve the song rather than themselves. Sawyer Brown always put the music first, and the music rewarded that loyalty completely. If this list is reminding you why country music gets into your soul and never quite leaves, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have plenty more country stories still to tell. Let's keep going. 11. Restless Heart. Restless Heart were one of the most musically sophisticated acts to emerge from the country scene in the 1980s, a 5-piece band whose vocal harmonies and instrumental precision placed them in a category that few of their contemporaries could approach. They arrived in Nashville in the mid-80s with a sound that honored country tradition while reaching towards something more polished and more emotionally complex than the genre typically allowed. That Rock Won't Roll, I'll Still Be Loving You, and Wheels were all #1 singles that demonstrated a band operating at the highest possible level of craft. Their 3- and 4-part harmonies were immaculate, constructed with the kind of care and attention that made every record feel like a finished piece of architecture rather than a collection of individual performances. 10. Poco. Poco occupy a unique and underappreciated place in American music history, a band who helped invent country rock in the late 1960s and then watched others receive the credit for the genre they had built. Formed from the ashes of Buffalo Springfield,
it's a song that I do every night, and every night the audience sings along with me, and it's a song that you've probably heard.
They arrived in 1969 with a sound that blended California rock with genuine country feeling in a way that was entirely new and entirely convincing. Richie Furay and Jim Messina were among the most gifted musicians of their generation, and the band they assembled around them was technically exceptional. Poco never achieved the commercial breakthrough their talent warranted, losing ground to the Eagles, who absorbed many of their innovations and delivered them to a far larger audience. But within the community of musicians who knew what they were listening to, Poco were always regarded as the originals, the band who pointed toward a sound that the entire decade would eventually follow. 9. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Few bands in American music history have done more to bridge the gap between generations than the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Formed in California in 1966, they spent the early part of their career blending folk, country, and jug band music into something that felt simultaneously ancient and completely contemporary. Their landmark 1972 album, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, brought together some of the oldest living legends of country and bluegrass music alongside younger rock and folk artists, creating a recording that functioned as both a historical document and a living conversation between generations. It remains one of the most important albums in American roots music history. The band continued recording and touring for decades afterward, never losing their commitment to the traditional sounds that had inspired them from the beginning. 8. Asleep at the Wheel. Asleep at the Wheel have spent more than 50 years keeping Western swing alive through sheer force of will, talent, and an absolute refusal to follow trends or chase commercial relevance at the expense of musical integrity. Ray Benson founded the band in 1970 with a specific mission to preserve and celebrate the music of Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys for audiences who might never have encountered it otherwise. What began as an act of musical preservation became something far more vital, a living, breathing band that made Western swing feel not like a museum piece, but like the most exciting music in any room they occupied. They won 9 Grammy Awards over their career, a remarkable achievement for a band operating in a genre most of the industry had written off entirely. 7. The Oak Ridge Boys. The Oak Ridge Boys began as a gospel quartet in the 1940s and spent 3 decades perfecting their harmonies before country music finally claimed them as its own. By the time they crossed over fully into the country in the late 1970s, they arrived with a vocal precision and a performance discipline that most acts spend entire careers trying to develop. Elvira, released in 1981, became one of the most recognizable country singles of the decade, driven by Richard Sturban's impossibly deep bass vocal and a chorus so immediately memorable that it seemed to exist in the cultural memory before anyone had actually heard it. But the Oak Ridge Boys were always more than any single moment of commercial success. They were a vocal institution, 4 voices that had been shaped by decades of gospel discipline into something that no amount of studio technology could manufacture. Harmony that deep always comes from somewhere real. 6. Exile. Exile arrived in country music through one of the more unusual trajectories in the genre's history, a rock band from Kentucky who had spent years chasing pop success before discovering that their truest voice was rooted in country soil. Their 1978 pop hit, Kiss You All Over, suggested a band heading in an entirely different direction, but by the early 1980s, they had committed fully to country, and the results were extraordinary. They scored 10 consecutive #1 country singles between 1983 and 1987, a run of commercial dominance that placed them alongside Alabama as the defining country acts of the decade. J.P. Pennington's songwriting was sharp and emotionally honest, and the band's rock background gave their country sound a muscularity that separated them from their contemporaries. Exile proved that the journey toward your true voice is rarely straight, and that sometimes you have to spend years playing the wrong music before you find the right one. 5. Diamond Rio. Diamond Rio arrived in Nashville in the early 1990s with something that set them apart from almost every other act of their generation. 5 musicians of genuine virtuosity who could play their instruments at a level that commanded respect from the most technically demanding audiences in any genre. Meet in the Middle, their debut single released in 1991, became the first debut single in country music history to reach #1, an achievement that announced a band arriving not with potential, but with complete readiness. Their vocal harmonies were rich and detailed, their instrumental work was precise without ever feeling clinical, and their songwriting balanced emotional directness with enough sophistication to reward repeated listening. Diamond Rio never chased trends or compromised their sound for commercial convenience, which meant their career arc was steadier and more durable than many of their flashier contemporaries. 4. Shenandoah. Shenandoah were one of the finest country bands of the late 1980s and early 1990s, a group whose commercial success never quite reflected the genuine quality of what they were producing. Marty Raybon possessed one of the most naturally gifted voices in country music, a warm and supple instrument capable of conveying heartbreak and joy with equal conviction and equal ease. 2 Dozen Roses, Church on Cumberland Road, and Next to You, Next to Me were all #1 singles that demonstrated a band at the peak of its powers, crafting radio-ready country music without sacrificing any of the emotional honesty that made the best country records endure. Internal disputes and label difficulties prevented Shenandoah from fully capitalizing on their commercial momentum, and they dissolved before delivering the body of work their talent clearly warranted. What they left behind was enough to secure their place in any serious conversation about the greatest country bands of their era. 3. Black Hawk. Black Hawk arrived in 1993 with a self-titled debut album that announced one of the most promising acts Nashville had seen in years. Henry Paul, Van Stevenson, and Dave Robbins brought together 3 distinct musical personalities and forged them into something cohesive and genuinely exciting. A country sound with rock edges and vocal interplay sophisticated enough to stand alongside the best harmony groups in the genre's history. Goodbye Says It All and Every Once in a While were #1 singles that showcased a band capable of matching commercial instinct with real musical substance. Van Stevenson's songwriting was among the sharpest in Nashville at the time, and his voice added a texture to the group's harmonies that gave their records a depth and complexity that casual listening rarely revealed fully. 2. Brooks and Dunn. Kix Brooks and Ronnie Dunn were 2 solo artists who had each spent years failing to break through individually when a label executive suggested they try working together. What followed was the most successful duo in country music history. Between 1991 and 2010, they released 20 #1 singles, won the Country Music Association Duo of the Year award an unprecedented 20 times, and sold more than 30 million albums worldwide. Their formula sounds simple in retrospect, but was almost impossible to replicate. Brooks brought the energy, the showmanship, and the rock and roll swagger. Dunn brought the voice, one of the most powerful and emotionally resonant instruments in the genre, capable of turning even a modest song into something that felt genuinely important. Boot Scootin' Boogie, Hard Workin' Man, and Neon Moon were country classics that captured different faces of the same American experience. Brooks and Dunn were not just a great duo, they were an institution. 1. Eagles. There has never been a band quite like the Eagles, and there likely never will be again. Formed in Los Angeles in 1971 from a collection of musicians who had each separately absorbed the full breadth of American roots music, they spent the following decade producing a body of work so commercially dominant and so artistically consistent that their place at the top of any country rock conversation is essentially beyond argument. Hotel California, Desperado, Take It Easy, and Lion Eyes were not just hit songs. They were cultural landmarks, recordings that captured something essential about the American experience at a specific and unrepeatable moment in time. Their vocal harmonies were extraordinary. Their instrumental work was precise and deeply felt. And their songwriting combined commercial instinct with genuine literary ambition in a way that the genre had never seen before and has rarely approached since. From fiddles and harmonies to hotel rooms and heartbreak, these bands wrote the soundtrack of a nation. Country music was never just entertainment. It was memory, identity, and truth pressed onto vinyl. If this list moved something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave your favorite in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.